Chapter 1. The Polite Request for Assistance. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on being a civilized organization. They had forms for everything. Forms for declaring war, forms for making peace, forms for requesting the bathroom key to the executive washroom on level 847 of the administrative complex. So when the Zephyrian Empire started making aggressive moves toward the peaceful Kepler Mining Collective, naturally they filed the appropriate paperwork. Form 77B, Request for Military Assistance from Member Species. It was a lovely form, really. 47 pages of bureaucratic poetry that basically boiled down to, help, we're being invaded by assholes. The Council reviewed it with the kind of thorough attention that only beings who had never actually been shot at could muster. The Zephyrians are indeed being quite rude, observed Councillor Vexhala, an 8-foot-tall crystalline being whose species had evolved on a planet where the most dangerous predator was a particularly aggressive type of moss. They've ignored 3 separate cease and desist orders. Most irregular, agreed Councillor Bleem, whose people had achieved sentience after millions of years of floating peacefully in gas-giant atmospheres, occasionally bumping into each other and saying, "Excuse me," in subsonic frequencies. The problem was that the Galactic Council's military consisted primarily of species that had evolved in what could charitably be called peaceful environments. The Crystalline Collective had developed technology through meditation and careful mineral arrangement. The floating philosophers had achieved spaceflight through sheer politeness and really good manners. The Botanical Brotherhood had figured out faster-than-light travel while trying to find better soil for their prize-winning orchids. None of them were particularly good at the whole shooting back thing. Perhaps we should consult the database for species with military experience, suggested Junior Counselor Pipsqueak, a 3-foot-tall creature that looked like a cross between a hamster and a philosophy professor. The database was consulted. It was a very thorough database, compiled over 3,000 years of galactic civilization. It contained detailed information on 47,000 species, their cultures, their technologies, their poetry — the galaxy took its poetry very seriously — and their military capabilities. Most entries under military capabilities read things like strongly worded letters, or passive-aggressive commentary, or really disappointed sighing. But there, buried on page 34,847 of the database, was an entry that made everyone stop and stare. Species: humans, homeworld, Terra. Classification: Death World, Class 12th. Population: 8.2 billion. Technology level: crude but disturbingly effective. Cultural characteristics: aggressive, persistent, apparently insane. Military capabilities: data redacted. Viewing requires level 10 clearance. Notes: recommend avoiding contact. These beings weaponize literally everything. Last diplomatic contact resulted in 3-day headache for entire first contact team after something called tequila shots. Quarantine recommended. Oh dear, said Councillor Vexhala, whose crystalline structure actually dimmed a little. I remember this species, they were intense. Didn't they try to arm wrestle Ambassador Gloop at the welcome reception? Asked Councillor Bleem, his gaseous form rippling with what might have been nervousness. That was after they challenged him to something called beer pong, Vexhala replied. Poor Gloop couldn't maintain cohesion for a week. Junior Counselor Pipsqueak raised a tiny paw. But surely they can't be that dangerous. I mean, look at their technology rating. Crude but effective doesn't sound very impressive. Senior Counselor Whiffleboop, an ancient being whose species had achieved enlightenment through the careful study of cloud formations, spoke up in his whispery voice. Young Pipsqueak, sometimes the most dangerous beings are not the ones with the fanciest weapons. Sometimes they're the ones who look at a problem and think, I wonder if I could solve this with explosives. But surely we're not that desperate, protested Councillor Bleem. I mean, there must be other options. There was a long pause as everyone consulted their tablets. The Zephyrians just took out 3 more mining stations, reported Councillor Vexhala. They're demanding surrender within 72 standard hours. And our other military allies? Asked Pipsqueak hopefully. The Pacifist Union is offering to write a very stern letter. The Meditation Masters are considering a group chant to express their disapproval. The Philosophical Society is debating whether conflict is morally justified, but they've only been at it for 6 months so far. Another pause. The Zephyrians are also broadcasting something called psychological warfare, Vexhala continued, reading from her tablet. They're playing what they call smooth jazz at high volume on all occupied stations. That did it. Even enlightened galactic civilizations had standards. Contact the humans, Senior Counselor Whiffleboop said grimly, and may the universe have mercy on us all. Chapter 2. The Phone Call. The first challenge was actually getting in touch with the humans. The Galactic Council's diplomatic corps had been avoiding Earth like it was radioactive, which, according to several reports, parts of it actually were. The humans had apparently done something called nuclear testing for several decades, which involved detonating fusion bombs to see what would happen. Because of course they did. The comm system crackled to life after several attempts. The face that appeared on screen was that of a human male, probably in his 30s, with dark hair and the kind of stubble that suggested he'd been awake for entirely too long. Behind him, other humans could be seen moving around what appeared to be some kind of military installation. "This is Commander Davis of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call, considering you folks have been dodging our communications for the past 15 years. Senior Counselor Whiffleboop cleared his throat, or made the sound his species used instead of throat clearing, which was more like a gentle breeze through wind chimes. "Commander Davis, I am Senior Counselor Whiffleboop of the Galactic Council. We find ourselves in need of assistance." Davis raised an eyebrow. "Assistance? From the violent, unstable Deathworlders who should be quarantined for the safety of civilized species?" He was clearly reading from something. "That's a direct quote from your last diplomatic report, by the way." "Ah," said Whiffleboop. "You've read our files. We've read your files, your secret files, your double-secret files, and that really embarrassing poetry your junior counselor Pipsqueak wrote about his crush on Ambassador Fluffytail from the Rabbit People." Davis leaned back in his chair. "You've been monitoring our communications for decades. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" Pipsqueak made a sound like a squeaky toy having an existential crisis. "Now," Davis continued, "you're calling us because someone's giving you trouble, and suddenly we don't look so scary anymore. Am I getting warm? The Zephyrian Empire has begun aggressive actions against the Kepler Mining Collective." Counselor Vexhala interjected. "They've taken 14 mining stations and are demanding surrender of the entire system." "And your military response?" "We've filed a formal protest." Davis stared at the screen for a long moment. "You filed a formal protest?" "Against an armed invasion. A very strongly worded protest," Bleem added hopefully. "Right." Davis rubbed his temples. "Okay, let me guess. Your idea of military action is probably something like, what, harsh language? Passive-aggressive fruit baskets?" "We did consider economic sanctions," Pipsqueak offered weakly. "Economic sanctions." Davis turned to someone off-screen. "Hey, Williams! These guys want to fight off an invasion with economic sanctions!" There was laughter in the background. "Sorry, my people find that amusing. We're a bit more direct in our approach." "Which is precisely why we're calling," Whiffleboop said. "We understand that your species has considerable experience with conflict resolution." "Conflict resolution?" Davis grinned, and it wasn't a particularly nice grin. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Sure, we've got experience with conflict resolution. What's in it for us?" "Well," Vexhala consulted her tablet, "we were prepared to offer you provisional membership in the Galactic Council." "Not interested." "Access to our advanced technologies. We'll figure out our own tech, thanks. And the gratitude of 47,000 civilized species. Pass." There was a pause. Davis seemed to be thinking. "Here's what I want," he said finally. "First, full disclosure. I want to know everything about this enemy, their capabilities, their weaknesses, their breakfast preferences, everything. Second, I want complete tactical autonomy. We do this our way, with no interference from your council. Third, when this is over, you formally recognize humanity as a sovereign species with full rights, not some kind of dangerous animals to be avoided." "And if we refuse?" asked Bleem. Davis shrugged. "Then good luck with your strongly worded letters. How's that working out for you so far?" Another pause as the council members exchanged glances. "The Zephyrians are demanding surrender in 68 standard hours," Vexhala reported quietly. 67 hours and 43 minutes, Davis corrected. "We've been monitoring their communications, too. So what's it gonna be?" Senior Counselor Whiffleboop made a sound like wind through dry leaves, which was his species' equivalent of a heavy sigh. "Very well, Commander Davis. We accept your terms." "Excellent. We'll have a ship ready to go in 6 hours. Send us the coordinates and all your intelligence on the Zephyrians. And Counselor Pipsqueak?" "Yes? Don't worry about the poetry thing. We've all written embarrassing stuff about people we liked. At least you didn't tattoo it on your forehead." "Humans do that?" Pipsqueak asked, horrified. "You'd be surprised what humans do," Davis said and cut the connection. Chapter 3. The briefing. The TDF retribution was not what the Galactic Council had expected. Most civilized species built their ships to aesthetic principles, graceful curves, pleasing proportions, the occasional decorative crystal formation. The Retribution looked like it had been designed by someone who had taken a perfectly good spaceship and then asked, "But how do we make it more intimidating?" It was angular, dark, and bristled with weapons that the Council's database couldn't even identify. Worse, it was fast. The journey that should have taken 3 days took just over 18 hours, during which time the human ship maintained complete radio silence. "Are you certain they're coming to help us?" asked Counselor Bleem nervously. "Because from here, it looks rather like they're coming to conquer us." "The thought had occurred to me," admitted Whiffleboop. "Perhaps we should have been more specific about our expectations." When the Retribution finally arrived in the Kepler system, it immediately began what the humans called reconnaissance. This involved flying directly at the occupied mining stations at high speed, scanning everything, and generally making their presence known in the most aggressive way possible. The Zephyrians, predictably, were not amused. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Zephyrian territorial claims," came the broadcast from the lead Zephyrian cruiser. "Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response from the Retribution was immediate and, in retrospect, entirely predictable. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Commander Davis of the Terran Defense Force. You are in violation of numerous galactic laws regarding unprovoked aggression against civilian targets. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system or we will remove you. You dare threaten the Zephyrian Empire with a single vessel?" The Zephyrian commander's voice was full of outrage and disbelief. "We have 12 warships in this system." "Correction," Davis replied calmly. "You have 12 targets in this system. 29 seconds. What happened next would be talked about in galactic military academies for centuries, assuming anyone survived to build galactic military academies. The Retribution didn't just attack the Zephyrian fleet. It dissected it. The humans had apparently spent the journey from Earth analyzing every piece of intelligence the Council had provided, plus everything they'd intercepted from Zephyrian communications. They knew exactly where to hit each ship for maximum damage. The first Zephyrian cruiser lost power in under 10 seconds. The second lost life support. The third simply exploded. Though the explosion was small and controlled, the humans had apparently calculated exactly how much damage would disable the ship without killing everyone aboard. "Zephyrian fleet, this is Commander Davis. You are now officially disarmed. Prepare to be boarded." "You cannot board our ships," the Zephyrian commander protested. "It is against all civilized conventions of warfare." "Good thing we're not civilized," Davis replied. "Stand by." The boarding operation was a work of art. Terrifying, efficient art. The humans used some kind of cutting device to make perfectly circular holes in the Zephyrian ships, then swarmed through wearing armor that made them look like mechanical demons. They moved with a precision that suggested they'd done this before, many times. Within an hour, every Zephyrian ship was secured, their crews detained, and the mining stations liberated. The humans had also somehow managed to capture the Zephyrian admiral alive and relatively undamaged. "Well," said Counselor Vexhala, watching the tactical display, "that was efficient." "I'm beginning to understand why they were classified as a dangerous species," Bleem added. "They just took apart an entire fleet like it was a mechanical puzzle." "The question now," said Whiffleboop, "is what they intend to do with the prisoners." That question was answered when Commander Davis contacted the Council ship. "Admiral Zixthil would like to speak with you," Davis said without preamble. "He has something resembling an apology to offer." The Zephyrian admiral appeared on screen a few minutes later. He was a tall reptilian being with scales that had gone from their normal golden color to a sickly gray. His eyes, normally fierce and predatory, now held the look of someone who had just discovered that there were bigger predators in the universe. "Honorable Council," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "The Zephyrian Empire wishes to formally apologize for our actions in the Kepler system. We were clearly misinformed about the nature of the opposition we might face." "What did they do to you?" asked Pipsqueak with morbid curiosity. They showed us their homeworld," Zixthil said quietly. "Their databases contain detailed information about something called Earth history. Did you know that these beings regularly fought wars that killed millions of their own people? For fun?" "Not for fun," Davis corrected from off-screen. "For political differences, resource disputes, religious disagreements, and occasionally because someone insulted someone else's hat. But never for fun. We save the fun stuff for after we win. They have weapons that can destroy entire planets," Zixthil continued. "And they've used them, on their own world, to test them." "Everyone makes mistakes," Davis said cheerfully. We learn from them, usually. They've been fighting continuous wars for their entire recorded history, the Admiral went on. They've never known peace. They've weaponized everything from sharp sticks to antimatter. They've turned their entire species into a military force just to survive their own planet. In our defense, Davis interjected, Earth is a terrible place to live. Everything there is trying to kill you. We had to adapt. But here's the really terrifying part, Krex'thul said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They're not even the dominant species on their planet. They share it with things called Australian wildlife and polar bears and viruses and something called mosquitoes that apparently kill more of them than all their wars combined. Mosquitoes are the worst, Davis agreed. I'd rather fight as a Furian fleet than spend a weekend camping in mosquito country. So, Krex'thul concluded, the Zephyrian Empire would like to formally surrender, withdraw all claims to the Kepler system, pay reparations to the mining collective, and never, ever do anything that might attract the attention of humans again. That seems reasonable, said Whiffleboop. Commander Davis, we assume you find these terms acceptable? Oh, I'm not done yet, Davis said, and his cheerful tone somehow made it sound like a threat. Admiral, you're going to go back to your empire and tell them exactly what happened here. You're going to explain that there are beings in this galaxy who consider warfare a recreational activity, and that the Galactic Council has made friends with them. You're going to make it very clear that unprovoked aggression against Council members is now a very, very bad idea. And if I refuse? Then I'll have to explain to my superiors why I let a bunch of aggressive reptiles go free instead of bringing them back to Earth for our xenobiology department to study. Davis paused. They've been asking for live specimens for years. Something about advancing our understanding of alien psychology through controlled stress testing. Krex'thul's scales went from gray to white. I'll deliver the message. Excellent. You've got 12 hours to get your ships operational and get out of this system. After that, we start charging rent. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. The debriefing took place aboard the Council ship, in what was supposed to be a formal meeting room, but had been hastily converted to accommodate a human guest. The furniture had been reinforced. Humans were apparently much denser than they looked. The air mixture adjusted. They needed a surprising amount of oxygen. And the temperature raised to what most species considered uncomfortably warm. Commander Davis sat across from the 5 council members, looking completely at ease despite being surrounded by alien beings. He'd removed his armor, revealing a standard military uniform that was surprisingly mundane. Without the intimidating gear, he looked like what he was, a professional soldier who'd just done his job. So, Davis said, accepting a cup of what the humans called coffee from a nervous assistant. I take it you're satisfied with the results? Satisfied is one word for it, Whiffleboop replied carefully. We must admit, we didn't expect the operation to be quite so thorough. You wanted the Zephyrians to stop threatening the mining collective, Davis said with a shrug. They've stopped. Problem solved. Yes, but we were rather hoping for something more diplomatic, Krex'thul ventured. Perhaps a negotiated settlement? Davis raised an eyebrow. They'd already ignored your diplomatic overtures, hadn't they? Sometimes people need a more direct demonstration of why their current course of action is a bad idea. By direct demonstration, you mean completely destroying their military capabilities and terrifying their leadership into submission, Bleem pointed out. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation, Davis replied. Besides, we didn't destroy anything. We disabled their ships, detained their personnel, and gave them a comprehensive education about why picking fights with random civilizations is a bad idea. No one was permanently harmed. What about the psychological trauma? Asked Pipsqueak. That admiral looked like he'd seen the end of the universe. He looked like someone who just realized that the universe is a lot more dangerous than he thought, Davis corrected. Which is true. That's not trauma, that's education. And this education included showing them your species' history? Whiffleboop asked. Standard psychological warfare, Davis confirmed. We've found that most aggressive species calm down significantly once they understand what they're dealing with. It's amazing how peaceful people become when they realize they're not the scariest thing in the neighborhood. But showing them records of human warfare, Krex'thul began, was completely factual, Davis interrupted. We didn't exaggerate anything. We just showed them the highlights. The 100 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, both World Wars, the Cold War, the Resource Wars, the Australian Emu War. You fought a war against birds? Bleem asked, incredulous. We lost, Davis said matter-of-factly. Emus are tough, but that's not the point. The point is that we've been dealing with conflict for our entire history. We're very good at it. And more importantly, we're very good at ending it. By winning, Pipsqueak said. By making the other side not want to fight anymore, Davis corrected. There's a difference. A victory that leaves your enemy planning revenge isn't really a victory. A victory that makes your enemy decide that peace is a much better option. That's how you end wars. And you think you've accomplished that with the Zephyrians? Whiffleboop asked. I think Admiral Zixthil is going to go back to his people and tell them about a species that's been fighting wars for thousands of years, wins most of them, and considers this kind of operation routine patrol duty. Davis finished his coffee. I think he's going to recommend very strongly that the Zephyrian Empire find a nice, quiet corner of the galaxy and focus on internal development for the next few centuries. What if he doesn't? Vex'hala asked. What if they decide to seek revenge? Davis smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping someone would ask that question. Then they'll discover that what they saw today was us being polite. You asked for our help, so we used minimal force and made sure everyone survived. If they come looking for a fight, he shrugged. Well, we won't be fighting on someone else's behalf anymore. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You're saying that today was you being restrained? Bleem asked weakly. We're currently at peace with everyone, Davis said. We like being at peace. It gives us time to develop new technologies, explore space, write poetry, raise families, all the things civilized species do. But we're also very good at not being at peace, when the situation calls for it. This is why your species was classified as dangerous, Whiffleboop said. You're not just warriors. You're warriors who enjoy peace but are always prepared for war. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about us, Davis said. Most people just focus on the death world part. About that, Pipsqueak said. Is Earth really as dangerous as the reports suggest? Davis considered the question. Well, let's see. We've got extreme weather patterns, active geology, a variety of large predators, several dozen species of venomous snakes, spiders that can kill you, fish that can kill you, plants that can kill you, and microscopic organisms that can kill you. Our moon is so large it affects our tides. Our magnetic field fluctuates randomly, and we get hit by asteroid impacts on a regular basis. That sounds terrible, Vex'hala said. It's home, Davis replied, and it made us what we are. You can't appreciate peace if you've never known conflict. You can't value cooperation if you've never faced a challenge that required everyone working together. Earth taught us that survival isn't guaranteed, that you have to fight for everything you want to keep, and that sometimes the best way to protect what you love is to be scary enough that no one wants to take it away from you. Is that why you agreed to help us? Bleem asked. To protect what we've built. Partly, Davis admitted. But mostly because you asked nicely, and we respect that. You could have tried to force us to help. You could have threatened us, or tried to bribe us, or any number of other approaches. Instead, you called us up, explained the situation, and asked if we'd be willing to lend a hand. That's the kind of civilized behavior we can get behind. Even though we'd been avoiding you for years? Whiffleboop asked. Especially because you'd been avoiding us, Davis said. Look, we know what we are. We know how we look to other species. We're okay with that. We'd rather be feared and respected than liked and ignored. But when you called us despite being afraid of us, when you trusted us to help instead of harm, that meant something. And now? Vex'hala asked. What happens now? Now we go home, Davis said. We file our reports, we debrief our people, and we go back to doing what we do. But we'll keep an eye on things out here. And if anyone else decides to cause trouble for the Council... He shrugged. Well, you've got our number. That's it? Pipsqueak asked. You're just going to leave? You don't need us anymore, Davis said. Word of what happened here is going to spread. Every aggressive species in the galaxy is going to hear about how a single human ship took apart a Zephyrian fleet in under an hour. They're going to hear about how we made Admiral Zixthil apologize and promise to be good. They're going to think twice before starting any more unprovoked wars. And if they don't, Whiffleboop asked, then they'll learn the same lesson the Zephyrians did, Davis said. We're patient, we're reasonable, and we're always willing to talk. But we're also humans, and humans don't lose wars. Chapter 5. The Reputation. 6 months later, the Galactic Council was dealing with a problem they'd never had before. Peace. It wasn't that there were no more conflicts in the galaxy. Disputes still arose, territorial claims were still made, and the occasional trade disagreements still flared up. But somehow these conflicts were being resolved through negotiation, compromise, and actual diplomacy rather than military action. It was unprecedented. It was also, according to some council members, deeply suspicious. The Altarian Republic backed down from their claim to the Vega system, reported Councillor Vex'hala during the monthly briefing. They cited changing strategic priorities and desire to maintain peaceful relations with neighboring systems. The Centauri Confederation withdrew their blockade of the trade routes, added Counselor Bleem. They said something about not wanting to escalate tensions unnecessarily. And the Syrian hegemony actually apologized for their aggressive posturing toward the Kepler mining collective, finished Pipsqueak. They sent a formal diplomatic note expressing regret for any misunderstandings. Senior Counselor Whiffleboop rustled his leaves thoughtfully. All of these situations would have required military intervention 6 months ago. Now they're being resolved through diplomatic channels. The question is, why? I think we all know why, Vexhala said quietly. Word has spread about what happened with the Zephyrians. Every species in the galaxy has heard about the humans. The stories are getting rather embellished, Bleem pointed out. The latest version I heard claimed that the humans destroyed the entire Zephyrian fleet with a single weapon that fired miniature black holes. That's not entirely inaccurate, Pipsqueak said. I've been reading their technical specifications. They do have weapons that manipulate gravitational fields, and their definition of miniature is concerning. The point is, Whiffleboop said, that our aggressive neighbors are now choosing diplomacy over military action. Not because they've become more enlightened, but because they're afraid of attracting human attention. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Vexhala asked. Peace through strength has been a recognized diplomatic strategy for millennia. But what kind of peace is it? Bleem wondered. If it's based on fear rather than mutual respect, how long can it last? They were about to find out. The communication came in during the middle of the night shift, when only a skeleton crew was manning the council chambers. It was from Admiral Zixthil, and he sounded panicked. Honorable Council, we have a situation. The Andromedans have invaded our system. They claim that humanity is a threat to galactic stability and must be contained. They're demanding that we join their coalition against the human homeworld. What did you tell them? Asked the duty officer. I told them that would be a very bad idea, Zixthil replied. They laughed. They said that humans might be dangerous to primitive species like us, but that a truly advanced civilization would have no difficulty dealing with a single Death World species. Oh dear, the duty officer said. How many ships do they have? Approximately 3,000, Zixthil said. They're calling it the Pacification Fleet. They want to make an example of humanity to discourage other species from developing what they call aggressive tendencies. 3,000 ships, the duty officer repeated, against one human world. The Andromedans seem to think it's overkill, Zixthil said. They've been the dominant military power in the Andromeda galaxy for millennia. They're not used to encountering serious resistance. Have you warned the humans? I tried, Zixthil said. They thanked me for the information and said they'd handle it. Then they invited me to observe the upcoming battle from a safe distance. I'm not sure whether that was meant as a courtesy or a threat. The duty officer was pretty sure it was both. Chapter 6, The Demonstration. The Andromedan Pacification Fleet was an impressive sight. 3,000 ships arranged in perfect formation, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to swift interceptors. They moved with the precision of a military force that had never known defeat, commanded by beings who had conquered entire galaxies and considered themselves the pinnacle of military evolution. Admiral Kethvar, Supreme Commander of the Pacification Fleet, stood on the bridge of his flagship and regarded the small blue planet before him with something approaching boredom. This was going to be a simple operation. Demonstrate superior firepower, force the humans to surrender, and establish an Andromedan protectorate over what was clearly a dangerous but primitive world. Scan results, Commander, he ordered. The planet shows extensive industrial activity, his subordinate reported. Large cities, advanced communications networks, and significant orbital infrastructure. However, we're detecting only minimal military presence in space. How minimal? Kethvar asked. Approximately 50 vessels, Admiral. Most appear to be converted civilian ships. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. 50 ships against 3,000. This will be over quickly. Admiral, his communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the planet. Put it through. The face that appeared on the main screen was familiar. Commander Davis, though he was now wearing a different uniform with more insignia. Apparently successfully intimidating the Zephyrian Empire had been good for his career. Admiral Kethvar, I'm General Davis of the Terran Defense Force. I understand you're here to discuss humanity's place in the galactic community. I am here to accept your surrender, Kethvar replied. Your species has been identified as a threat to galactic stability. You will submit to Andromedan authority, disarm your military, and accept the civilizing influence of a superior civilization. That's going to be a problem, Davis said. We've got this policy about not surrendering to people who show up uninvited and start making demands. It's worked out pretty well for us so far. You have 50 ships, Krex'thul pointed out. I have 3,000. Surely even a primitive species can understand those odds. Oh, we understand them perfectly, Davis replied. Question is, do you understand what you're dealing with? I am dealing with a single world populated by aggressive primitives who have had some minor success against equally primitive neighbors. That success has made you overconfident. Overconfident, Davis repeated. That's interesting. Tell me, Admiral, have you ever been to a death world? I have conquered 17 galaxies, Krex'thul said. I have faced every form of military opposition known to exist. That's not what I asked, Davis said patiently. Have you ever been to a death world? Not conquered one, not observed one from orbit, but actually set foot on a planet where everything is actively trying to kill you? Such worlds are rare, Krex'thul admitted. Most intelligent species avoid them. Most intelligent species didn't evolve on them, Davis said. We did. Do you know what it takes to survive on a death world, Admiral? It takes paranoia. It takes the ability to see every possible threat and prepare for it. It takes the understanding that the universe is not a safe place, and that your survival depends on your ability to be more dangerous than everything else around you. Your philosophical musings are irrelevant, Krex'thul said. Surrender now, or we will take your world by force. I was really hoping you'd say that, Davis replied, and smiled. You see, Admiral, we've been aware of your fleet for 3 weeks. We've been tracking your approach since you left Andromedan space. We know exactly how many ships you have, what their capabilities are, and what your battle plan is. Impossible, Krex'thul said. Our fleet uses the most advanced stealth technology in existence. Advanced by whose standards? Davis asked. Admiral, let me explain something about Death World species. We don't just prepare for the threats we can see. We prepare for the threats we can't see. The ones we haven't encountered yet, and the ones that might not even exist. We've been watching your galaxy for decades, studying your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses. We know more about Andromedan military doctrine than most of your own officers. Even if that were true, Krex'thul said, you still have 50 ships against 3,000. Actually, Davis said, we have about 50 ships that you can see. Computer, show the Admiral what he's missing. The space around Earth suddenly lit up with energy signatures. Hundreds of ships decloaked, appearing as if from nowhere. They emerged from behind asteroids, from within the orbital infrastructure, and from positions that should have been impossible to hide in. Within seconds, the Andromedan fleet found itself surrounded by nearly 1,000 human vessels. Stealth technology, Davis explained helpfully. We've been working on it for a while. Turns out, when you live on a planet where everything wants to eat you, you get really good at not being seen until you want to be seen. Admiral Krex'thul's mandibles had stopped clicking. This is unexpected. Oh, Admiral, this is just the beginning, Davis said. Computer, show him the really fun stuff. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter suddenly began moving. What had appeared to be random chunks of rock revealed themselves to be massive weapons platforms, their surfaces bristling with armaments that made the Andromedan dreadnoughts look like toys. The moon's surface split open like a flower, revealing launch bays that disgorged swarms of smaller vessels. You see, Davis continued conversationally, we took that whole Death World thing to heart. We figured that if we were going to live in a dangerous universe, we might as well make our entire solar system dangerous too. Those asteroids? Weapons platforms. The moon? Military base. Mars? Shipyard and training facility. Jupiter's moons? Research stations working on things that would give your scientists nightmares. This is impossible, Krex'thul said, but his voice had lost its confidence. No species could militarize an entire star system. No peaceful species, Davis agreed. But we're not a peaceful species, Admiral. We're a species that learned to survive on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. We're paranoid, we're prepared, and we're really, really good at making things that explode. The Andromedan fleet was now completely surrounded. Human ships had appeared from directions that shouldn't have been possible, using technology that their sensors couldn't properly track. Worse, the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. So here's what's going to happen, Davis said. You're going to turn your fleet around, go back to Andromeda, and tell everyone you meet that Earth is off limits. You're going to explain that humans are not a threat to galactic stability. We are galactic stability. We're the reason aggressive species like the Zephyrians have suddenly discovered the benefits of diplomacy. And if I refuse? Krex'thul asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you'll discover why we call this system Sol, Davis replied. It's named after an old human word meaning the sun. Do you know what stars are, Admiral? They're giant fusion reactors. And do you know what humans do with fusion reactors? The implications of that statement hit Kethvar like a physical blow. You wouldn't. We've weaponized everything else, Davis said with a shrug. Did you really think we'd leave out the star? Don't worry, we wouldn't actually use it. Probably. But we could, and that's what matters. This is madness, Kethvar said. This is humanity, Davis corrected. We're the species that looked at the most dangerous planet in the galaxy and said, this'll do. We're the species that turned warfare into an art form and then got bored with it. We're the species that other species call when they need someone to solve their problems with applied violence. What do you want? Kethvar asked. Nothing, Davis said. That's the beauty of it. We don't want to conquer anyone. We don't want to rule anyone, and we don't want to impose our will on anyone. We just want to be left alone to do our thing. But apparently that's too much to ask for. Your thing? Exploration, discovery, art, literature, bad movies, good beer, and the occasional really spectacular explosion when we're testing new technology, Davis said. Simple pleasures for simple people. But every time we try to mind our own business, someone shows up and tries to tell us how to live. The Galactic Council asked for our help, Davis interrupted. They said please, they said thank you, and they treated us like equals. That's all we've ever wanted. But you? You showed up with 3,000 ships and demanded our surrender. That's not diplomacy, Admiral. That's bullying. And you don't like bullies, Kethvar said, beginning to understand. We really don't, Davis confirmed. Bullies are what made Earth such a dangerous place to live. Every species that tried to push us around. Every predator that thought we'd make an easy meal. Every natural disaster that tried to wipe us out. They all made the same mistake. They assumed that because we were small or weak or new, we couldn't fight back. What happened to them? They're extinct, Davis said simply. We're not. That should tell you something. Admiral Kethvar looked around at his fleet, completely surrounded by human vessels, and made a decision that would save his career, his life, and quite possibly his entire species. The Andromedan Pacification Fleet withdraws, he announced. We acknowledge that humanity is not a threat to galactic stability. Smart choice, Davis said. Safe travels, Admiral. And next time you want to talk, try calling first. We're much more pleasant when we're not being invaded. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The aftermath of the Andromedan incident was felt throughout the galaxy within hours. The footage of 1,000 human ships appearing from nowhere, of weapons platforms disguised as asteroids, of the casual mention of weaponizing a star, spread faster than the speed of light through quantum communication networks. Most species reacted with variations of, oh, that explains everything. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was having what could charitably be called a crisis of confidence. They weaponized their star, Counselor Vexhala said for the 15th time. They turned their own sun into a weapon. We don't know that for certain, Whiffleboop replied, though he didn't sound convinced. It could have been a bluff. A bluff? Bleem's gaseous form was rippling with agitation. These are the beings who detonated fusion bombs on their own planet to see what would happen. Does that sound like a species that bluffs about weapons of mass destruction? Perhaps we should ask them, Pipsqueak suggested. They've been quite forthcoming about their capabilities so far. Oh, they've been forthcoming, Vexhala said. They've been telling us exactly what they are from the beginning. We just didn't want to believe it. What do you mean? Whiffleboop asked. I've been reviewing their files, Vexhala said, pulling up a holographic display. Every interaction we've had with them, every piece of intelligence we've gathered, every casual comment they've made, it all adds up to the same conclusion. Which is? They're not just a military species, Vexhala said. They're a species that has transcended the need for military action by being so overwhelmingly prepared for it that no one wants to fight them. Explain, Bleem said. Look at the pattern, Vexhala continued. The Zephyrians attacked the mining collective. The humans responded with exactly the amount of force necessary to end the conflict permanently. Not excessive force. They could have destroyed the Zephyrian fleet entirely. But they used precision violence to achieve a specific goal. Which was? To demonstrate that violence against council members would be met with overwhelming retaliation, Vexhala said. They didn't just defeat the Zephyrians. They created a deterrent that prevented other species from making the same mistake. And now? Pipsqueak asked. Now the Andromedans have inadvertently provided the humans with an even better demonstration, Vexhala said. They've shown the galaxy that Earth isn't just defended. It's a fortress. A fortress populated by beings who have spent their entire evolutionary history preparing for exactly this kind of situation. So what does this mean for us? Whiffleboop asked. It means, Vexhala said, that we need to reconsider our entire approach to galactic security. For 3,000 years, we've tried to maintain peace through diplomacy, negotiation, and mutual agreement. It's worked reasonably well, but it's always been vulnerable to aggressive species who didn't share our values. And now? Now we have allies who share our goal of peace but are willing to use methods we could never consider, Vex'hala said. The humans don't want to conquer anyone. They don't want to rule anyone. They just want to be left alone to do their thing. But they're also willing to make sure that everyone else is left alone too. By scaring potential aggressors into submission, Bleem said. By demonstrating that aggression has consequences, Vex'hala corrected. It's not about fear, it's about cost-benefit analysis. The humans have made military action so costly that diplomacy becomes the more attractive option. Is that ethical? Pipsqueak asked. Is it ethical to let aggressive species terrorize peaceful ones? Vex'hala replied. The humans aren't forcing anyone to be peaceful. They're just making sure that choosing violence comes with a price tag that most species aren't willing to pay. And if someone is willing to pay that price, then they'll discover that the price is higher than they thought, Vex'hala said. The humans have made it clear that they're prepared for any level of conflict, but they've also made it clear that they prefer not to use their full capabilities. Which brings us back to the original question, Whiffleboop said. What do we do now? We do what we've always done, Vex'hala said. We maintain diplomatic relations, we promote peaceful resolution of conflicts, and we try to make the galaxy a better place for all species. The difference is that now we have friends who ensure that our efforts won't be undermined by those who prefer force to reason. So we're officially allying with the humans? Bleem asked. I think, Vex'hala said, that we're officially acknowledging what was already true. The humans have been our allies since the moment they agreed to help us with the Zephyrians. They've been protecting our interests and our values ever since. The only question is whether we're going to be worthy of their friendship. And how do we do that? Pipsqueak asked. By being the best versions of ourselves, Vex'hala said. By showing them that their protection of civilized values is worthwhile. By proving that diplomacy and peaceful cooperation can build something worth defending. And if we fail, then we'll discover that the humans have contingency plans we haven't even imagined, Vex'hala said. But somehow I don't think we'll fail. They wouldn't have bothered protecting us if they didn't think we were worth protecting. Chapter 8. The Understanding. 3 months after the Andromedan incident, General Davis found himself back in the council chambers, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of nervous aliens trying to hire muscle, he was facing what looked like a group of old friends catching up. General Davis, Whiffleboop said warmly, thank you for coming. I trust the journey was pleasant? Not bad, Davis replied, accepting the now familiar cup of coffee. Though I notice you've upgraded your security protocols. Very thorough. We've learned a few things about proper precautions, Vex'hala said with what might have been embarrassment. It occurred to us that if we're going to be allies with the galaxy's most dangerous species, we should probably take security more seriously. Dangerous is such a harsh word, Davis said. I prefer competent. You militarized your entire star system, Bleem pointed out. That goes a bit beyond competent. That's just good planning, Davis said. Besides, most of those installations have been there for decades. We just never mentioned them before. Why not? Pipsqueak asked. Because nobody asked, Davis said simply. And because we figured that if people knew exactly how well defended Earth was, they might get the wrong idea about our intentions. What kind of wrong idea? That we were planning to conquer the galaxy, Davis said. Which we're not. Conquest is expensive, time-consuming, and generally more trouble than it's worth. We tried it a few times in our early history. Didn't work out well for anyone involved. But you're prepared for it if someone tries to conquer you, Vex'hala said. We're prepared for everything, Davis corrected. That's what growing up on a death world teaches you. You plan for the worst-case scenario. You prepare for things that probably won't happen. And you make sure you're ready for threats that don't even exist yet. Like what? Whiffleboop asked. Well, for instance, we've got contingency plans for dealing with rogue AI, alien parasites, time travelers, parallel universe invasions, and something called the heat death of the universe, Davis said. Most of those things will probably never happen, but if they do, we're ready. Time travelers? Bleem asked weakly. You never know, Davis said. Point is, we like to be prepared. It's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you, and in our experience, someone usually is. Is that why you agreed to help us? Pipsqueak asked. Because you saw us as a threat? Just the opposite, Davis said. We helped you because you clearly weren't a threat. You were just trying to live your lives in peace, and someone was making that difficult for you. We respect that. And now? Now we're in the interesting position of being the galaxy's unofficial peacekeepers, Davis said, which is ironic, considering how much time we've spent fighting each other. Do you mind? Vex'hala asked. Being the peacekeepers, I mean. Mind? We're good at it, Davis said. Turns out the best way to keep the peace is to be so good at war that nobody wants to fight you. It's worked out pretty well so far. What about the future? Whiffleboop asked. Where do we go from here? That depends on you, Davis said. We're happy to keep doing what we're doing, exploring space, developing technology, occasionally intimidating aggressive species into behaving themselves. But we're also interested in learning from other civilizations. You've built something impressive here, a peaceful alliance of thousands of species, working together for mutual benefit. That's not easy to achieve. We've had our failures, Vex'hala admitted. Wars, conflicts, misunderstandings that led to violence. Everyone has failures, Davis said. The question is whether you learn from them. From what we've seen, you have. You've built something worth protecting, and you've shown that you're willing to work with anyone who shares your values, even scary Deathworlders like us. You're not that scary, Pipsqueak said. I mean, you're terrifying in combat, but you're actually quite pleasant to talk to. We try to be, Davis said. Diplomacy is usually more effective than intimidation. But it's nice to have intimidation as a backup option. So what happens now? Bleem asked. Now we figure out how to work together, Davis said. You've got knowledge, wisdom, and experience with peaceful cooperation. We've got military expertise, advanced technology, and a really good understanding of how to deal with aggressive neighbors. Seems like a good combination. Are you proposing a formal alliance? Whiffleboop asked. I'm proposing a partnership, Davis said. You keep doing what you do best. Diplomacy, peaceful resolution of conflicts, building bridges between species. We'll keep doing what we do best, making sure that nobody interferes with that process. And if someone does interfere, then they'll discover that humans have a very broad definition of proportional response, Davis said. But hopefully it won't come to that. Word is getting around that the Galactic Council has some very effective friends. Most species seem to be taking the hint. Most species, Vex'hala said. But not all? There are always a few who think they're special, Davis said. They'll learn. Or they'll find out why everyone else decided to be reasonable. You make it sound simple, Bleem said. It is simple, Davis replied. You treat people with respect, you mind your own business, and you don't start fights you can't finish. Basic rules for getting along with others. And if someone breaks those rules, then they get a lesson in why those rules exist, Davis said. But like I said, most people are reasonable once they understand the situation. The situation being that humanity is the most dangerous species in the galaxy, Pipsqueak said. The situation being that humanity is the most dangerous species in the galaxy and we're on your side, Davis corrected. There's a difference. Indeed there is, Whiffleboop said. And we're grateful for it. Don't be grateful, Davis said. Be worthy of it. Keep being the civilized, peaceful, reasonable beings you are. Keep showing the galaxy that cooperation is better than conflict. Keep proving that different species can work together for mutual benefit. And you'll keep making sure we can do that safely, Vex'hala said. We'll keep making sure that anyone who tries to stop you will regret it, Davis said, which amounts to the same thing. Epilogue. The new normal. 1 year after the Andromedan incident, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the Terran Peace. It wasn't that there were no more conflicts. Species still disagreed, territorial disputes still arose, and the occasional trade war still flared up. But these conflicts were resolved through negotiation, arbitration, and diplomatic compromise, rather than military action. The change was remarkable. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly discovered the benefits of peaceful coexistence. Trade flourished, scientific cooperation increased, and cultural exchange became common. The galaxy was experiencing a golden age of peace and prosperity. And everyone knew why. The humans had made it clear that they were the galaxy's self-appointed guardians of peace, and they were very good at their job. They didn't interfere in local politics, they didn't try to impose their values on other species, and they didn't demand tribute or acknowledgement. They just made sure that everyone understood the consequences of choosing violence over diplomacy. It was a simple system, and it worked. The Galactic Council had established a formal embassy on Earth, staffed by representatives from dozens of species. The humans had reciprocated by opening diplomatic missions throughout Council space. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchange programs were established, and joint scientific ventures were launched. But the real success was measured in what didn't happen. Wars that would have been fought were avoided. Conflicts that would have lasted years were resolved in weeks. Aggressive species that would have terrorized their neighbors instead focused on internal development and peaceful expansion. The galaxy was a better place, and everyone knew it. General Davis, now promoted to Director of Galactic Affairs, stood in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean and reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Rigelian Consortium had backed down from their claims to the Tau Ceti system. The Arcturian Empire had agreed to arbitration in their dispute with the Betelgeuse Federation. The Capellan Syndicate had formally apologized for their misunderstanding with the Aldebaran Collective. Another quiet month, his aide reported. No major incidents, no military buildups, no threats to galactic stability. Boring, Davis said with satisfaction. I like boring. Do you think it will last? The aide asked. Davis considered the question. The peace? Probably. People are starting to realize that cooperation is more profitable than conflict. The next generation is growing up in a galaxy where diplomacy is the norm and warfare is the exception. That's the kind of change that tends to stick. And if it doesn't, then we'll remind everyone why it's a good idea, Davis said. But I don't think we'll need to. We've established the rules. We've demonstrated the consequences of breaking them. And we've shown that following them leads to prosperity and peace. Most species are smart enough to figure out which option is better. The humans as galactic peacekeepers, the aide mused. Who would have thought? Anyone who understood what we are, Davis said. We're not conquerors or tyrants. We're gardeners. We create environments where good things can grow and bad things can't survive. We've done it with our own world, we've done it with our solar system, and now we're doing it with the galaxy. And if someone tries to mess with our garden, then they'll discover that gardeners can be very protective of their work, Davis said. But most people prefer flowers to weeds. It's just a matter of making sure they understand the difference. Outside his window, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in orbit, human ships patrolled the approaches to Earth, ready to defend their world and their allies. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species were going about their daily lives, secure in the knowledge that they lived in a universe where peace was protected by those who understood the true cost of war. It was, Davis thought, a pretty good arrangement. The humans had asked for nothing more than the right to be left alone to do their thing. The galaxy had given them that right, and in return, they had given the galaxy something it had never had before: true peace. Not the peace of the conquered, but the peace of the protected. Not the peace of the weak, but the peace of the strong. Not the peace of those who couldn't fight, but the peace of those who were so good at fighting that no one wanted to fight them. It was the kind of peace that could last for generations, built on the simple understanding that some things were worth protecting, and that there were those willing to do the protecting. The galaxy was in good hands, even if those hands happened to belong to the most dangerous species in the universe. But then again, that was exactly why it worked. The end. This story explores the concept of peace through strength, and the idea that sometimes the most effective peacekeepers are those who are best prepared for war. The humans in this story aren't conquerors or tyrants. They're gardeners who create environments where civilization can flourish and aggression cannot survive. It's a different take on the HFY genre, focusing not on humanity's capacity for violence, but on our ability to use the threat of violence to preserve peace. The story suggests that true peace doesn't come from the absence of conflict, but from making conflict so costly that all parties prefer cooperation. It's a philosophy that has worked throughout human history, and in this fictional future, it works on a galactic scale. The humans in this story are dangerous not because they're evil, but because they're competent. They're prepared for everything, they plan for the worst-case scenario, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to protect what they value. But what they value most is the right to be left alone to live their lives in peace. And they're willing to extend that same protection to anyone who shares their values. In the end, the galaxy is a better place not because humanity conquered it, but because humanity made it safe for civilization to flourish. Sometimes the best way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war. You know, Captain, I'm starting to think bringing a human to the Krex'thul Honor Games wasn't your brightest idea. Commander Vextai's voice carried that particular tone that universally translates to "I told you so" across 17 different species. His 4 arms gestured dramatically at the arena below, where a rather unremarkable-looking human woman sat cross-legged on a meditation mat, apparently oblivious to the towering, battle-scarred warriors surrounding her. Captain Zoreth, leader of the mixed-species mercenary company known as the Void Reapers, didn't look up from his datapad. Riley knows what she's doing. Does she? Vextai's secondary arms pointed at the human again. She's been sitting there for 3 hours reading some sort of paper book. An actual paper book, Captain. while every other contestant is either sharpening weapons, practicing combat forms, or engaging in intimidation displays. Mm-hmm. Zoreth finally glanced up, his reptilian features impassive. And what are they doing now? Vextai looked back at the arena. The various warriors, Krex'thul, Vorthak, a few stellar Confederation regulars, and one absolutely massive Gorthani, were indeed still going through their routines. But now they were doing so while stealing glances at the human. They're wondering what she's reading, aren't they? The Art of War, if I had to guess. That's not exactly reassuring, Captain. Zoreth's laugh was a low rumble that made his scales shimmer. Riley's been with us for 3 years, Vex. Name one situation where she's been unprepared. The Kepler Station incident. She was perfectly prepared for that. The problem was that none of us were prepared for her solution. Vextai's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of exasperation in his species. Ah yes, the infamous aggressive negotiation that somehow turned a hostage situation into an impromptu peace treaty. Exactly my point. Down in the arena, the human, Riley Crenshaw, according to her registration, closed her book and stood up. At 5'6" and maybe 140 pounds soaking wet, she looked like a child among the assembled warriors. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore standard-issue combat fatigues that had seen better days. The Gorthani warrior, who went by the name Thrakbone and stood nearly 8 feet tall, took notice of her movement. His species was known for their strength and their absolutely zero sense of humor about combat. They were also known for their tendency to view smaller species as automatically inferior. So, Thrakbone's voice boomed across the arena. The little human finally finished her bedtime story? A few of the other warriors chuckled. Riley simply smiled and tucked the book into her pack. Something like that, she replied, her voice carrying easily despite its softness. Though I have to say, some of the strategies in here are really quite fascinating. Strategies? This came from Krex'thul, the Krex'thul prince whose father had organized these games. The Krex'thul were essentially militant space lizards with a cultural obsession with honor, strength, and proving one's worth through combat. Krex'thul had inherited his father's arrogance along with his title. What strategies could a human possibly teach a true warrior? Riley's smile widened slightly. Oh, you know, basic stuff, like how to win without fighting. The arena went quiet except for the distant hum of the environmental systems. Then Thrakbone laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Win without fighting? That's the talk of cowards and weaklings. Is it? Riley tilted her head, looking genuinely curious. I always thought it was just efficient. Efficient? Krex'thul's tail lashed behind him. Combat is about proving one's strength, demonstrating superiority. It's about showing off. The silence that followed was the kind that makes experienced warriors reach for their weapons. Not because they're planning to fight, but because they can feel the tension in the air like a physical thing. I beg your pardon? Krex'thul's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Well, I mean, if you're fighting someone weaker than you, you're not really proving anything, are you? It's like, what's the human expression, shooting fish in a barrel? Up in the observation deck, Vextai leaned over to his captain. She's doing it again. Doing what? That thing where she says something innocuous that somehow makes everyone want to simultaneously protect her and challenge her to single combat. Zoreth nodded approvingly. She's really refined the technique. Down in the arena, Krex'thul had drawn himself up to his full height of 7 feet. His scales had shifted to a deeper shade of red, a sign of aggression in his species. Are you suggesting, he said slowly, that we are showing off? Oh no, not at all, Riley said quickly. I'm sure you have very good reasons for all the posturing and weapon waving. It's probably very meaningful within your cultural context. Thrakbone's massive fist clenched. Posturing? Well, I mean, what else would you call it? You're all clearly skilled warriors, anyone can see that. But you're spending most of your time trying to intimidate each other instead of actually, fighting. Perhaps, said a new voice, because some of us understand that true strength doesn't need to be demonstrated through playground antics. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was another human, though this one was male and considerably larger than Riley. He wore the insignia of a stellar Confederation Marine and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd seen real combat. Sergeant Blake Morrison, he introduced himself with a nod toward Riley. And you're absolutely right. All this chest beating is just compensation for insecurity. Now wait just a minute, Thrakbone growled. No, Morrison continued, warming to his theme. She's got a point. Look at you all. Biggest, strongest, most heavily armed beings in the sector, and you're threatened by a woman reading a book. We are not threatened by... Krex'thul began. Could have fooled me, Morrison interrupted. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're all trying really hard to convince yourselves that you're not worried about what happens when someone who doesn't need to prove anything steps into the ring. Riley shot him a look that was half gratitude, half exasperation. Blake, you're not helping. Sure I am. I'm making them angry at me instead of you. That's not better. Isn't it? Now they'll be so focused on proving they're not insecure that they won't be thinking strategically. Up in the observation deck, Vextai's four eyes widened. Oh no. What? Zorith looked up from his datapad again. She's not the only one, Captain. There are two of them. Two of what? Humans who think psychological warfare is a form of entertainment. Indeed, down in the arena, Riley and Morrison had somehow managed to turn the pre-competition tension into what looked suspiciously like a therapy session. The various warriors were now arguing not about combat techniques or honor, but about whether their behavior constituted posturing, and what that might say about their inner psychological state. This is ridiculous, Krex'thul declared. We are warriors, not subjects in some sort of mental analysis. Are you sure about that? Riley asked. Because honestly, the whole honor through combat thing seems like it might be overcompensating for something. Overcompensating? Krex'thul's voice had gone up an octave. Well, I mean, if you were really confident in your abilities, would you need to constantly prove them? It's like, oh, what's that human saying about the size of weapons correlating with enough? The roar came from the viewing gallery above, where Warlord Thexai, Krex'thul's father, and the supreme leader of the Krex'thul military, had apparently heard enough of this conversation. The massive reptilian figure stood nearly 9 feet tall, his scales a deep purple that spoke of age and authority. Battle scars crisscrossed his hide, and his presence radiated the kind of power that made even experienced warriors take an involuntary step backward. This is supposed to be a competition of warriors. Thexai's voice carried easily through the arena's acoustics. Not a debating society. Riley looked up at him and offered a small wave. Hi there. You must be the one in charge. I'm Riley. The warlord's eyes narrowed. I know who you are, human. Your reputation precedes you. Good reputation or bad reputation? That depends on one's perspective. Fair enough. So, are we actually going to fight at some point, or are we just going to keep talking about fighting? Thexai's laugh was like distant thunder. Direct. I can appreciate that. Very well, human. Let us see if your actions match your words. He gestured, and the arena's holographic display activated, showing a tournament bracket. Single elimination. Combat continues until one participant yields or is rendered unconscious. Weapons are permitted, but lethal force is prohibited. Standard rules, Morrison observed. Though I notice you didn't mention anything about psychological warfare. Because, Thexai's gaze fixed on him, true warriors don't need to rely on such soft tactics. Riley's eyebrows rose. Soft? The human female, Krex'thul added, emboldened by his father's presence, appears to believe that talking can substitute for actual combat skill. Perhaps she should stick to activities more suited to her nature. Such as? Domestic duties, perhaps, or child-rearing. Activities that don't require physical strength or tactical acumen. The arena went dead silent. Even the environmental system seemed to quiet down. Up in the observation deck, Vextai covered his face with two of his hands. Oh, he didn't just say that, he moaned. What? Zorith asked. He just called her soft, in front of everyone, and suggested she should be doing domestic work instead of fighting. So? Captain, Riley once arm-wrestled a Gorthani sergeant and won. She did it to settle a dispute about who had to clean the weapons bay. And? The Gorthani sergeant was Thrackbone. Down in the arena, Riley's expression hadn't changed. She still wore the same mild, pleasant smile she'd had throughout the entire conversation. But something in her posture had shifted, a subtle alteration that Morrison clearly recognized, because he took a careful step backward. Soft, she said, as if testing the word. That's interesting. Perhaps, Thexai rumbled. You would prefer to withdraw from the competition? There would be no shame in... Oh no, Riley interrupted gently. I wouldn't dream of it, though I do have one small request. Which is, can I fight your son first? The warlord's massive head tilted slightly. You wish to challenge Krex'thul specifically? Well, he seems to have some very strong opinions about my capabilities. It would be rude not to give him a chance to back them up. Krex'thul's scales darkened further. I dare what? Ask for a fair fight? Isn't that what this whole thing is about? This is a tournament, Krex'thul said slowly. The matches are determined by the tournament organizer, Riley finished. Which would be you. So, what do you say? Father and son both seem pretty confident that I'm not cut out for this sort of thing. Why not let Junior prove it? The Warlord studied her for a long moment. Around the arena, the other warriors had gone very still. Even Thrackbone seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Very well, Krex'thul said finally. Krex'thul, you will face the human first. Father, this is beneath. You will face her. The Warlord's voice carried an edge that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. And you will demonstrate why soft tactics have no place in a warrior's arsenal. Krex'thul's tail lashed once, but he nodded. As you wish, Father. The arena's holo display shifted, showing the two combatants in the center ring. Riley walked to her starting position with the same casual gait she'd used all day. Krex'thul stalked to his, every movement radiating barely contained aggression. Standard combat rules, the arena's AI announced. Victory by submission, unconsciousness, or knockout. Combatants, are you ready? Ready, Krex'thul snarled. Oh, absolutely, Riley said cheerfully. Begin. What happened next would be discussed in warrior taverns across 17 systems for years to come. Krex'thul charged. It was a textbook Krex'thul assault, all power and aggression, designed to overwhelm an opponent through sheer force. His claws extended, his powerful legs propelled him forward like a biological missile, and his battle cry echoed through the arena. Riley didn't dodge. She didn't block. She didn't even move. Instead, she waited until Krex'thul was exactly 3 feet away. Then she spoke. Your father's watching. The words hit Krex'thul like a physical blow. His charge faltered for just a moment, a tiny hesitation as the implications sank in. He was about to tackle a human woman half his size in front of his father, the assembled warriors, and probably half the Krex'thul High Command. That moment of hesitation was all Riley needed. She stepped to the side, not a desperate dodge, but a casual, almost lazy movement. As Krex'thul's momentum carried him past her, she reached out and grabbed his extended arm. What followed was a perfect example of applied physics, a smaller object using a larger object's momentum against it. The throw was textbook judo. Krex'thul's 7-foot frame went up and over, his own charge converted into rotational energy that sent him crashing into the arena floor with a sound like a small earthquake. But Riley wasn't done. As Krex'thul hit the ground, she maintained her grip on his arm and smoothly transitioned into an armbar. The leverage was perfect, his elbow locked against her hip, his wrist controlled by her hands, and absolutely nowhere for him to go. You know, she said conversationally, as if she weren't currently applying enough pressure to Krex'thul's joint to make him whimper. I really wasn't kidding about that whole win without fighting thing. I don't... Krex'thul gasped. The thing is, Riley continued, real combat isn't about proving how strong you are. It's about achieving your objectives with minimal risk to yourself. And right now, my objective is to demonstrate that soft tactics can be just as effective as charging around like an angry bull. She applied a little more pressure. Krex'thul's breathing became labored. Now you have 2 choices. You can submit or I can dislocate your elbow. I should mention that option 2 will hurt considerably more than option 1. Take your time, Riley said pleasantly. Though I should warn you that my grip strength is about to become a factor. Humans have surprisingly strong hands, you know. Something about our evolutionary development. Up in the observation deck, Krex'thul was staring at his datapad in fascination. Captain, according to the medical sensors, she's not even breathing hard. Of course not, Zorith replied. She's having fun. Fun? She's systematically dismantling the son of the most powerful warlord in this sector. Like I said. Down in the arena, Krex'thul was discovering that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. The pressure on his elbow was becoming genuinely painful, and Riley showed no signs of fatigue. I yield, he gasped. Riley released him immediately and stepped back. Good choice. Are you okay? I didn't hurt you, did I? Krex'thul rolled to his feet, cradling his arm. His scales had gone pale, a sign of shock and humiliation in his species. How did you... Physics, Riley said simply, plus about 15 years of martial arts training. Though honestly, the physics part is more important. You can't fight momentum, but you can redirect it. She turned to address the arena in general. See, this is what I mean about efficiency. Poor Krex'thul here worked really hard to build up all that kinetic energy, and I just borrowed it for a moment. Borrowed? Thrackbone's voice was strangled. Well, what would you call it? I didn't add any energy to the system. I just changed its direction. Morrison was grinning openly now. You know, I'm starting to think these guys might not be ready for human combat doctrine. What's that supposed to mean? One of the Vorthak warriors demanded. It means, Riley said, that you're all thinking about fighting the wrong way. You're treating it like a contest of strength, when it's really a contest of applied intelligence. Intelligence? Thexai's voice carried down from the observation deck. You defeated my son through trickery. Did I? Let's review. I used superior positioning, better timing, and more efficient application of force. In what way is that trickery? You made him hesitate. I made him think. There's a difference. The warlord's eyes narrowed. You deliberately disrupted his concentration. I pointed out a fact that was already true. If that disrupted his concentration, maybe he needs to work on his focus. That's... Thexai paused, clearly struggling with the concept. That's not honorable combat. Says who? Says tradition, says the warrior code, says someone who's never had to fight for their life, Riley interrupted. Look, I get it. You have this whole cultural thing about honor and proving yourself through combat. But the thing is, honor doesn't stop disruptor bolts, and tradition doesn't make you bulletproof. You dare question our ways? I'm questioning whether your ways are as effective as you think they are. She gestured around the arena. Everyone here is a skilled warrior. I can see that. But you're all so focused on looking like warriors that you've forgotten how to actually fight. We haven't forgotten. Really? Because your son just charged straight at me like I was a practice dummy. No feints, no strategy, no adaptation. Just point and smash. Is that really the pinnacle of Krex'thul combat doctrine? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Thexai spoke. You think you can do better? I think I just did. Against one opponent, who was not expecting your unconventional approach. Riley's expression turned calculating. Are you suggesting a rematch? Because I'm pretty sure everyone here knows exactly what to expect now. I'm suggesting, the warlord said slowly, that you face multiple opponents. See how your soft tactics work against warriors who are prepared for them. How multiple? All of them. The arena went dead silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. All of them? Riley repeated. Every warrior in this arena, at once. Morrison whistled low. Wow, that's either really confident or really stupid. Both, Vextai muttered up in the observation deck. Riley considered this for a moment. Standard rules? Standard rules. And if I win? If you win, Thexai's voice carried a note of amused disbelief. I'll publicly acknowledge that human combat doctrine has merit. And if I lose? You'll acknowledge that soft tactics are no substitute for true warrior strength. Deal. The arena's holo display shifted again, showing Riley in the center of the ring surrounded by 8 other combatants. The Gorthani, 3 Krex'thul including Krex'thul, 2 Vorthak, and 2 Stellar Confederation regulars including Morrison. Blake, Riley called out, you don't have to do this. Morrison shrugged. Orders are orders. Besides, I'm curious to see how this plays out. Fair enough. Just try not to take it personally when I have to hurt you. Same to you. The other warriors spread out around the ring, forming a rough circle. Riley remained in the center, hands at her sides, looking remarkably calm for someone about to face 8-to-1 odds. You know, she said conversationally, this reminds me of something Sun Tzu wrote. More reading? Thrackbone growled. He said that the supreme excellence is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But if you must fight, the next best thing is to win quickly and decisively. Meaning? Meaning this is going to be over faster than you think. Begin! What happened next would later be described as either the most impressive display of martial arts skill in recorded history, or the most elaborate practical joke ever perpetrated on a group of professional warriors. The combatants rushed her simultaneously, a coordinated assault that should have overwhelmed any single opponent through sheer numbers. Riley's response was to do something that made absolutely no tactical sense. She sat down, not dove for cover, not rolled away, not even dropped into a defensive crouch. She simply sat down cross-legged in the center of the ring, as if she was about to meditate. The charging warriors, suddenly faced with the prospect of trampling a seated opponent, had to adjust their attacks mid-charge. This led to a moment of confusion as 8 different combatants tried to figure out how to attack someone who was literally sitting still. That moment of confusion was all Riley needed. She sprang up from her seated position like a coiled spring, her hands moving in a series of precise strikes that seemed to defy physics. The first Vorthak warrior found himself flat on his back before he even realized he'd been hit. The second got a nerve pinch that left him temporarily paralyzed. Thrackbone swung a massive fist at where Riley had been, only to find empty air. She was already behind him, applying pressure to a point on his neck that made his knees buckle. "Gorthani physiology," she said cheerfully as the massive warrior collapsed. "Your species has this lovely nerve cluster right there. Very convenient." One of the Krex'thul, not Krex'thul, who was hanging back after his earlier experience, lunged with claws extended. Riley caught his wrist, used his momentum to spin him around, and somehow managed to tie his arms behind his back using his own belt. "You know," she said, as she ducked under Morrison's swing, "I really should thank you all for this. I've been wanting to try some of these techniques in a controlled environment." She grabbed Morrison's arm and hip-tossed him into the second Krex'thul, sending both of them tumbling across the arena floor. "The thing about fighting multiple opponents," she continued, casually stepping aside as the remaining Confederation regular tried to tackle her, "is that it's really more about geometry than strength." She demonstrated this by positioning herself so that when the Confederation soldier missed his tackle, he collided with the wall instead of her. "See? If you can control the spacing and timing, you can essentially fight one person at a time, even when there are multiple opponents." That left Krex'thul, who was now faced with the prospect of attacking the human who had already humiliated him once, while his father watched from above. "I don't suppose you'd consider yielding?" Riley asked pleasantly. Krex'thul's response was to charge again, apparently having learned nothing from his first encounter. This time Riley didn't even use judo. She simply stepped aside and stuck out her foot. Krex'thul's momentum carried him forward, his legs tangled with her ankle, and he went face first into the arena wall with a resounding crash. "Physics," Riley said, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "Momentum plus obstacle equals impact." She looked around the arena, which now resembled a battlefield. Warriors were scattered across the floor in various states of unconsciousness, temporary paralysis, or simple bewilderment. The entire fight had lasted less than 3 minutes. "So," she called up to the observation deck, "how was that for soft tactics?" Silence. I'm happy to demonstrate some of the harder techniques if you'd prefer. Though I should warn you that those tend to involve more permanent damage." Still silence. "Or we could talk about why this worked. See, the thing about traditional warrior culture is that it's based on the assumption that combat is about proving superiority. But real combat where lives are at stake, is about achieving objectives with minimal risk to yourself." She gestured at the scattered warriors. "Every single one of these people is stronger than me. Probably faster, too. But strength and speed don't matter if you can't apply them effectively." "How?" Thexai's voice finally came from above. "How did you—" "Training," Riley said simply. "And thinking. See, you all telegraphed your attacks. You moved in predictable patterns. You relied on brute force instead of technique. And most importantly, you forgot that combat is as much about psychology as it is about physical ability." "Psychology?" "I made you angry. Angry people make mistakes. They rush in without thinking. They abandon strategy in favor of emotion. And they become predictable." She walked over to where Morrison was trying to untangle himself from the Krex'thul warrior. "You okay, Blake?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Though I think you might have dislocated my shoulder. Sorry about that. Here, let me fix it." She grabbed his arm and popped the joint back into place with a motion so quick and precise that he barely had time to wince. "Better?" "Much. Though I have to say, that whole sitting down in the middle of a fight thing was either brilliant or completely insane. Both. It's called the unexpected response strategy. When faced with an unconventional situation, most people default to conventional responses. But if you do something they're not expecting, it creates a moment of confusion that you can exploit. And if it doesn't work, then you get trampled by 8 people and probably spend the next few weeks in a medical bay. Calculated risk? All the best strategies are." Up in the observation deck, Thexai was having what appeared to be a crisis of faith. The Warlord stood motionless, staring down at the arena where his son, his heir, the future of his bloodline, was slowly peeling himself off the wall. "Sir," one of his advisors ventured. "She's right," Thexai said quietly. "Sir, the human. She's right. We've become so focused on the ritual of combat that we've forgotten its purpose." The advisor looked confused. "The purpose of combat is to prove one's worth. The purpose of combat," Thexai interrupted, "is to win. Everything else is ceremony." He activated the arena's communication system. "Human." Riley looked up. "Yes? You have proven your point. Human combat doctrine has merit. Thank you. Though I should point out that this isn't really human combat doctrine. It's just smart fighting." "There's a difference?" "Human combat doctrine is much more terrifying. This was just basic martial arts. More terrifying? Riley's expression turned deadly serious. Human combat doctrine is based on the principle that there are no rules in a real fight. No honor, no fair play, no consideration for tradition or ceremony. The only objective is to neutralize the threat and survive. And that's more effective? Well, let's put it this way. My species conquered an entire planet without developing faster-than-light travel. We fought wars with sticks and stones, then metal tools, then chemical explosives, and finally nuclear weapons, all while stuck on a single world. Your point? My point is that humans have been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years. We've had to because we're individually weak and have lots of natural predators, so we got very, very good at making up for our physical limitations through intelligence, technology, and ruthless efficiency. She gestured at the scattered warriors. This wasn't human combat doctrine. This was me being gentle. The arena went very quiet. Gentle? Krex'thul's voice was muffled by the fact that his face was still pressed against the wall. Well, yeah. I mean, nobody's dead. Nobody's even seriously injured. In a real fight, I would have started with the throat strikes and worked my way up to the really unpleasant stuff. Such as? Do you really want to know? The silence that followed suggested that no, they really didn't want to know. I thought not, Riley said cheerfully. So what happens now? Krex'thul was quiet for a long moment. Now, he said finally, we revise our training protocols. Good idea. Though I should warn you, it's going to be a lot more work than just charging at things. How so? Well, for starters, you're going to have to learn to think strategically. Real combat isn't about individual prowess. It's about adapting to changing circumstances, exploiting your opponent's weaknesses, and using every advantage you can find. That sounds dishonorable. That sounds like survival. Honor is a luxury you can afford when you're safe. When you're fighting for your life, the only thing that matters is going home. She helped Morrison to his feet and started walking toward the arena exit. But hey, that's just one human's opinion. You're welcome to keep doing things the traditional way if you prefer. Wait, Krex'thul called. Riley paused. Yes? Would you be willing to train our warriors, to teach them these techniques? Riley considered this. That depends. Are you willing to let go of some of your traditions? Such as? Well, for starters, the idea that combat is about proving superiority. In real fighting, ego gets you killed. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to win, even if it doesn't look impressive. And you have to accept that sometimes the best fight is the one you don't have. Running away, negotiating, finding alternative solutions, those aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of intelligence. That goes against everything we've been taught. I know. But here's the thing. Your way produces warriors who are strong, skilled, and absolutely predictable. My way produces fighters who are adaptable, unpredictable, and focused on results rather than appearances. She shrugged. Your choice. But I'll tell you what. If you ever find yourself in a real war, against opponents who don't share your sense of honor, you're going to want people who know how to fight dirty. Fight dirty? Fight to win, by any means necessary. Krex'thul was quiet for a long moment. Then, very well, I accept your offer. Excellent. Though I should warn you, my training methods are unconventional. More unconventional than sitting down in the middle of a fight? Riley's grin was absolutely wicked. Oh, that was just the warm-up. As she walked out of the arena, followed by a slowly recovering Morrison and a very thoughtful group of alien warriors, Krex'thul turned to his captain. So, he said, remind me never to call her soft in front of witnesses. Noted, Zoreth replied, though I have to say I'm curious about these unconventional training methods she mentioned. Are you curious enough to volunteer for them? Not even slightly. Smart man. Down in the arena, Krex'thul was finally peeling himself off the wall, his pride as bruised as his face. As he stumbled toward the exit, he found himself replaying the fight in his mind. How had she moved so fast? How had she known exactly where to strike? And most importantly, how had she made it look so effortless? He was going to have to ask her, but first he was going to have to apologize. And something told him that was going to be the harder of the two tasks. 3 hours later, Riley sat in the Void Reaper's quarters, a cup of coffee in one hand, and her battered copy of The Art of War in the other. Morrison sat across from her, an ice pack pressed to his shoulder. So, he said, how long have you been planning that little demonstration? Since about 5 minutes after they started talking about soft tactics, Riley replied. Though I have to admit, I wasn't expecting quite so many volunteers for the group beating. That was impressive, by the way. I've never seen anyone handle 8 opponents like that. It's all about controlling the flow of the fight. Once you get them reacting to you instead of acting on their own initiative, you can pretty much dictate the outcome. Morrison leaned back in his chair. You know, I'm starting to think you might have just started a revolution. What do you mean? Think about it. If the Krex'thul adopt human combat doctrine, how long before their enemies have to adapt? And then their enemies' enemies? And so on? Riley considered this. You're right. This could spread throughout the entire sector. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That depends on your perspective. From a strategic standpoint, it's probably good. Wars will be shorter and more decisive. From a cultural standpoint, it's going to be chaos. Probably, but the alternative is stagnation, and stagnation is just death by another name. Cheerful. I'm a realist. As if summoned by their conversation, the door chimed. Riley called out permission to enter, and Krex'thul walked in, looking significantly more humble than he had in the arena. Human Riley, he said formally. I have come to apologize for my words earlier. Apology accepted, Riley said immediately. Though I have to ask, what changed your mind? Krex'thul's tail twitched in what might have been embarrassment. My father made me watch the recording of our encounter, multiple times, from different angles. Ouch. He pointed out that I made 17 distinct tactical errors in the span of 30 seconds. Only 17? That's actually pretty good for someone who's never fought outside their cultural framework. You're not mocking me? Not at all. The fact that you're here, willing to learn, puts you ahead of most people I've met. Krex'thul looked genuinely surprised. Thank you. But I must ask, how did you know to say what you said? About my father watching? Riley smiled. Because I was watching him. He was leaning forward, clearly invested in the outcome. And you kept glancing up at the observation deck. It was obvious that his opinion mattered to you. So you used my feelings as a weapon. I used your distraction as an opportunity. There's a difference. I'm not sure I understand. Morrison leaned forward. She's saying that your emotions weren't the weapon. They were the opening. Exactly. Riley nodded. Emotion doesn't win fights, but it can create opportunities for technique to win fights. The door chimed again, and this time it was Krex'thul himself who entered. The massive warlord had to duck slightly to fit through the doorway, and his presence seemed to fill the room. Warlord, Riley said politely, I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to discuss the details of this training arrangement, Krex'thul rumbled. If you're serious about it. I'm serious, though I have some conditions. Name them. First, your warriors have to be willing to abandon their preconceptions about combat. That means no more honor duels, no more ceremonial fighting, no more proving anything to each other. Agreed. Second, they have to be willing to look foolish while they learn. Some of the techniques I'll teach them will seem ridiculous at first. Such as? Well, for instance, I'm going to teach them to run away. Krex'thul's eyes narrowed. Run away? Strategic withdrawal. Tactical repositioning. Call it whatever you want. But sometimes the smart thing to do is leave and come back with better odds. That is, not the Krex'thul way. Which is exactly why you need to learn it. Your enemies will never expect a Krex'thul to retreat, which means they won't be prepared for you to return with reinforcements. I see. Third, they have to be willing to fight dirty. No more rules about honorable combat or fair play. If you're fighting for your life, the only rule is to survive. Define dirty. Anything that works. Throwing sand in someone's eyes. Attacking from ambush. Using the environment as a weapon. Psychological warfare. Deception. Whatever gives you an advantage. Krex'thul was quiet for a long moment. These tactics, they go against everything we've been taught. I know. But here's the thing. Your traditional tactics work great against other Krex'thul. But what happens when you face an enemy who doesn't follow your rules? Someone who attacks without warning, uses underhanded tactics, or refuses to engage in honorable combat. We adapt, do you? Because from what I've seen, most warrior cultures just try to impose their own rules on their enemies. They expect everyone to fight the same way they do. And when that doesn't work? We've tried every possible approach to combat. Honorable, dishonorable, traditional, innovative, individual, collective. You know what we learned? What? The only thing that matters is winning. Everything else is just ceremony. That's a very cold way of looking at it. It's a realistic way of looking at it. Look, I'm not saying you have to abandon your culture or your values, but if you want to survive in a universe full of people who don't share those values, you need to be prepared to fight on their terms. And you can teach us this? I can teach you the basics. But honestly, the real education comes from experience. You need to fight people who don't play by your rules. You need to be surprised, confused, and occasionally humiliated. That doesn't sound pleasant. It's not. But it's better than being dead. Krex'thul, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination, finally spoke up. Human Riley, when you fought me, when you made me hesitate, how did you know that would work? Riley considered the question. I didn't. It was an educated guess based on what I'd observed about your personality and your relationship with your father. And if it hadn't worked? Then I would have tried something else. Combat isn't about having one perfect plan. It's about adapting to changing circumstances. But how do you learn to adapt so quickly? Practice. Lots and lots of practice. And not just physical practice, mental practice. You have to train your mind to stay calm under pressure, to process information quickly, and to consider multiple options simultaneously. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also what keeps you alive. Krex'thul stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. Very well. When do we begin? How about tomorrow? I'll need some time to prepare a curriculum. And what will this curriculum include? Riley's expression turned absolutely predatory. Oh, we'll start with the basics. Hand-to-hand combat, weapon techniques, tactical movement. But then we'll move on to the really interesting stuff, such as psychological warfare, deception, improvised weapons, environmental exploitation, unconventional tactics, and the advanced course? Let's see how you handle the basics first. As the two Krex'thul left, Morrison turned to Riley. You know, I'm starting to think you might have just changed the course of galactic history. What do you mean? Think about it. If this works, if you actually manage to revolutionize Krex'thul combat doctrine, it's going to send shockwaves throughout the entire sector. Every military force is going to have to rethink their strategies. Riley considered this. You're right. This could be the beginning of something much bigger. Is that a good thing? That depends on your perspective. From a strategic standpoint, it could lead to more efficient warfare. From a humanitarian standpoint, she shrugged. Wars might be shorter, but they'll probably be a lot more vicious. Any regrets? About what? Teaching people how to survive? About potentially unleashing human combat doctrine on an unsuspecting galaxy. Riley's smile was sharp and calculating. Blake, the galaxy stopped being unsuspecting the moment humanity left Earth. We were always going to share our approach to warfare eventually. Better to do it on our terms than have someone else figure it out the hard way. That's surprisingly philosophical. I contain multitudes. So what happens next? Next, we see if the Krex'thul are as adaptable as they think they are. And if they're not, then we'll have learned something valuable about the limits of cultural change. And if they are? Riley's expression turned absolutely feral. Then we'll have created something the galaxy has never seen before. A warrior culture that actually knows how to fight. That sounds terrifying. It should, but it's also necessary. The universe is a dangerous place, and the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than everything else. Including other humans? Especially other humans. We're the species that figured out how to split atoms just so we could blow each other up more efficiently. Never underestimate human creativity when it comes to violence. As they sat in comfortable silence, both of them contemplating the implications of what they'd just set in motion, Riley couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. She'd come to this tournament expecting a simple demonstration of human adaptability. Instead, she'd potentially started a revolution that could reshape the entire sector's approach to warfare. But then again, that was the thing about humans. They had a tendency to overcomplicate things. And sometimes, overcomplicated was exactly what the situation required. The next morning, Riley stood in the Krex'thul training facility, watching as 24 of their finest warriors assembled before her. They looked skeptical, confused, and more than a little nervous. "All right," she said cheerfully. "Who's ready to learn how to fight dirty?" The expressions that greeted this question suggested that they were about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. And Riley couldn't wait to show them. After all, they'd called her soft. Time to show them what soft really meant. The end.